Good afternoon and welcome to Education Panel 11, titled Building an Everyone a Changemaker and Contributor Culture in Education, sponsored by Ashoka Innovators for Public, which is the largest network for social entrepreneurs worldwide. As the pandemic has brought resilience and innovation into the spotlight, it is imperative to ask the leaders in education if they are prepared to face the current challenges in society. Ashoka has always believed that education has a responsibility to do and be better, and as a community, we must discuss and contemplate to not just be innovators and contribute, but also contributors to change. This panel will highlight a few case studies from the leaders in education, presenting stories, strategies, and lessons in rewiring education's purpose, relevance, and business models. It hopes to answer how society and how social innovation can guide innovation and leadership decisions that can be scaled across large networks, especially the government education system. To drive this discussion, I'd like to welcome our moderator, Dr. Urvashi Sahani, who is a social entrepreneur, women's rights activist, and educationist who has been active in the field for more than 3 decades. She founded Suraksha, a women's rights organization, Didis, a social enterprise for sustainable livelihoods for women, and the Study Hall Education Foundation, or CHEF. Currently, she is the founding president and CEO of CHEF. Welcome, Dr. Sani. It's an honor to have you here. I'd now like to introduce the panelists, starting with Mr. Yashveer Singh, who leads the Ashoka Young Changemakers program as Ashoka Innovators for the Public. He has co-authored a book called #Change Starts Young, featuring inspiring stories of young change makers from across India. For his work, Yashvi has been recognized in Forbes 30 Under 30 Asia list in the year 2016. Welcome, Yashvi. It's a pleasure having you here. Next, I'd like to introduce Ms. Ramya Venkatraman, who is the founder and CEO of Center for Teacher Accreditation, CENTA Private Limited, a social enterprise that is making teaching a rewarding and attractive profession and career, and through that, driving fundamental change in the quality of education. Welcome, Ms. Ramya. Thank you for joining us despite your busy schedule. Now I'd like to introduce Mr. Nesargik Lenka, who is a young innovator, social entrepreneur, and is currently a student of class 12. Due to his innovations and social impact assignments, Nesargik has been a recipient of numerous awards, both at the national and international level, including the Pradhan Mantri Rashtriya Bal Shakti Purushkar of 2019 for his excellence in the field of innovation. Welcome, Nesargik. It's a delight to have you here. And last but not the least, I'd like to introduce Mr. Akash Sethi, who is the CEO of Quest Alliance. Akash is empowering unemployed youth to become motivated self-learners and build the 21st century skills with purpose, choice, and confidence. He's transforming classrooms and skill training programs into vibrant hubs of self-training and role modeling teachers as 21st century facilitators and redesigners for education technologies to put young people in charge of their own learning career paths. Welcome, Akash. It's a pleasure to have you. Now I'd hand this session over to Dr. Sahani.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to the India Edu Future Summit 2020. And I think we have a very good title, that everyone a change maker and contributor culture in education. How do we build it? I wanted to start by saying that you cannot have a flourishing democracy unless you educate everyone to be a change maker and a contributor. So it's the perfect title. So as you can see, we have a great panel, and today the floor is yours, my dear panelists. So I'm going to just take 2 or 3 minutes to frame the topic. And then we'd love to have the teacherly perspective, the teacher development perspective from Ramya, the skills development perspective from Akash, Yashvi, the Ashoka changemaker perspective, and Nesargik, of course, the most important of all, the student perspective, right? You know, we all know that India shut down March 20th. I won't forget it. My birthday is on the 22nd. So, you know, here we were. And 32 crore children were shut out of their schools. Education shut down, schools shut down, but education did not. And of course, the immediate thing was, let's get online, let's get online. And while we were doing all of that, I wondered, I said, what about the many who don't have a line to get onto? And just like the stay-at-home call, I remember wondering that what about the people who don't have a home to stay in? What became very visible was divides of any kind. And to our purpose, of course, the class divide, which was evident with all the migrant crisis that was let loose, and the visibility of it, and the digital divide. We know now that not more than 36% of urban households have access to internet, rural households even less, and women half of that, and students, according to a report, only 12.5% students across the country really had access to internet. So I don't know what lines we were talking about. More than that, almost all teachers, and Ramya, you'll probably bear me out, from any kind of school were not prepared to do online teaching the way they were just thrown into it. And so we were all struggling and trying to cope. Everyone has been talking about remodeling India, reimagining education. The thought that comes to me is that we've always wanted to remodel. I'm thinking of John Dewey. Way in the 19th century, he was talking about practical learning, learning by doing. Then think of our own Rabindranath Tagore, 1901. Think of our Rajghat Education Center, J. Krishnamurti, 1928. Then the whole educating for 21st century skills movement, which has been on. But nobody was paying any attention to all of that. And like it happens, it takes a crisis to bring the urgency to the fore. And now everyone is talking about all the things that we have always needed. A shift away from content to processes, a shift towards more creative thinking, imaginative thinking, innovative thinking, critical thinking, democratic thinking, and teacher development, a change of roles to a facilitator and less to a deliverer of content, right? And students as self-learners, as innovators, rather than just devourers of information. All this we've always advocated for, but the good news is, everyone on the panel, we have been advocating for a long time. All your work is testimony to that, all our work. But now people are listening because we're in a crisis. Everyone is struggling. And just hota nahi, ghar mein kuch toot jaye. For a long time, you've been thinking, I want to do this, I want to do that. You don't do it. Then something major breaks. And then you end up overhauling the whole house. So here's our opportunity. And I'm looking very forward to hearing what you all have to say. You worked for a long time in all these areas. And I would love to hear what you have to say about how we can now finally fix a system that we know needs fixing, that we've been trying to do for a long time. So here's our opportunity. What are we going to do? So I want to start first with you, Yashvi, and it will be very helpful if you'd share with the audience the whole Ashoka's perspective on everyone a change maker. Yeah? What does it mean? What are some change maker skills relevant for our students and young people? We would love to hear you. You have 3 minutes. And your time starts now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sani. I think first I would like to thank all the organizers, CSR Box, for putting this together. It's fascinating that so many people in the space of education are coming together and talking and evaluating different aspects. On your question, Dr. Sani, as in the introduction, I think Sanjana was sharing that Ashoka is a network of social entrepreneurs. And for us, it's been 40 years we've been working with social entrepreneurs. And while working with these social entrepreneurs, I think, of course, what we all know is a social entrepreneur is someone who from deep within is committed for the good of all. And so is their work. And for us, social entrepreneurship was really about bringing that fundamental change in the society on any given problem. And while working with these social entrepreneurs, not limited just to education, but all other sectors, fields, there were some patterns which were very obvious and which we saw through the life stories, through the work of these social entrepreneurs. So firstly, let me share just a couple of them with the audience. So while working decades with our Ashoka fellows, what we realized is that most of our Ashoka fellows, and we have done a lot of surveys and looked at these aspects, most of our Ashoka fellows started being change makers very early on in their life, which meant that they started their first initiative to solve either at a school level or community level, somewhere during their, I think, growing up years between the age of, I think, 13, 14 to 17, 18. The second important insight was that most of these social entrepreneurs working in the space of education skills were putting young people in charge. So for them, young people being at the center, being contributors, being active participants in the overall education system was very key. And the third bit, which I would like to say, is that largely the belief in the social entrepreneurs was that for the world to be a better place, we need to empower everyone, right? We need to transform the world from a place where only few lead to everyone leads. And for us, that is something which we call a change maker world, where everyone contributes, everyone has the mindset and skill set to contribute. On the parallel, another thing which we all seeing, and Dr. Sani, as you were sharing the context, that currently we are living in these very extraordinary times where we are making this final move from a world which is being organized around repetition to a world which is being now organized around change, which is, if you look closely, it is actually completely opposite. So the question which came not just at COVID time, but way before that in front of us was that how do we really prepare the world so that it can start being contributors to change and it can quickly adapt to this change. And for us, it was very clear that unless we start engaging with children and young people and show the insight to the society that only if we empower our young people as change makers while they are growing up, we will not be able to change the way, I think, some problems are.
Thank you, Yashvi. Thank you. Yes. And actually, I think we should have understood this as soon as we became independent. That education is, the goal of education is not just to know, but to live. And you can't have a functioning democracy if we don't educate all our children for democracy, and contribution is an important part of democracy. And we were a new country, we needed many change makers. And so we have lost 72 years, but there I durustai, we should at least try to catch up very quickly and really be working at turning our whole education needs an overhaul. The content, the curriculum, the pedagogy, and even learning spaces, right? So how are we going to do that? Ramya, let me turn to you. That I read I was listening very attentively to your introduction, and of course I know who you are. As I mentioned earlier, teachers have struggled. Teachers have struggled. I think education has been in the news more. Next to COVID, education has been in the news because people have everyone, parents, teachers, students, educators, policymakers, everyone has struggled. But you worked for so long with teachers, and I would really like to know that how has Center, first of all, stepped up during this time to help the teachers? And my second question is that, everyone's talking about how teachers didn't have any skills to go online, to teach online. Is that the only skill they were missing, is what I want from you. Okay. Please, Ramya. And you have
sure.
I will be, you'll get a 1 minute alert before that.
Sure. So firstly, with due apologies to everyone, since the time of this session changed, I have a pre-scheduled meeting at 2 o'clock, and therefore I will drop out a couple of minutes before that, just quietly without interruption. So just want to say that up front. But yeah, thank you, Ashoka. Thank you, CSR Box. It's also a nostalgic moment because I'm an Ashoka fellow and therefore have close linkages with the organization, and very glad to be on a panel organized by Ashoka. So coming to your question, Dr. Sani, so quick background. As Center, what we try to do is to assess and certify the competencies of teachers and connect them to a range of opportunities, and therefore motivate a much larger population of teachers to improve themselves. Because our theory of change fundamentally is that adults do not learn just because training is pushed onto them, either through the mandate of say a senior government official or a senior private sector leader, or through the appeal of civil society. Adults learn when they recognize that this learning will play a role in my day-to-day work, and it will also enable my career to grow and enable me to get recognized, rewarded, get financial rewards, whatever. Some of the things which we as a society somehow feel, no, we should not, associate with teaching. But teachers, like any other professionals, get motivated by reward, recognition, career growth, new roles, new opportunities, etc. And that's what we as Center are trying to create for teachers who have met a certain competency bar. Now, what has happened with COVID? It's actually very interesting. So, on one hand, Dr. Sani, as you're saying, teachers are struggling, and I'll come back to that. But uh, even before that, on the positive side, with online teaching, etc., the world at large is starting to recognize teaching as a profession much more. And this is a very fundamental dynamic that is taking place, where a parent is now able to see a classroom running rather than the classroom being a black box. And the parent is able to see that in the same school, this teacher is good and this teacher is not so good. And therefore, I start valuing that, yes, there is something very important with respect to competencies in teaching. And there are certain teachers who are distinctly more competent. So how do I, as an ecosystem, recognize and reward those teachers? And we are finding a lot of that recognition starting to happen even more than it was happening before. So through the last 5 years of our work, we have been able to create that recognition for thousands and thousands of competent teachers. We currently work with about 1.5 lakh teachers coming from 6,000 cities and towns across India. But in the last 3 months, we are finding that this recognition for competencies has actually increased multifold in a very short time. And many more teachers, therefore, both want to get certified. So our testing has sort of gone through the roof. And many more people want to get upskilled, and which is where I'll come back to the last.
Yeah. Thank you. Since you said that you would be leaving earlier, let me ask you your second question now too.
Sure.
That you might not be here when we come to the second round. So let me ask you now. Here's my thing. I've been an educator for several years, and like you, an Ashoka fellow. What I have had, we run schools, etc., is that teacher training, teacher development actually leaves a lot to be desired. So teachers are all really very good people and want to do their best, but it is their teacher training is so, I must say this, even though it's a strong word, so deficient, let me say, that it trains them really to teach in the old way, teach them for rote learning, teach them for exams, teach them as just content deliverers. And so that even competencies, even sometimes when we talk about good teachers, the good teacher might just be a more efficient deliverer of information, might be just a more efficient teacher to the exams, or deliverer of test results, right? But I'm assuming that I want you to tell us a little bit more about what you see, what you think about teacher development, and also about the shifting role that if you are thinking of a new pedagogy, a new curriculum, then there has to be a new pedagogy, right? So what can you describe briefly what you think is this new pedagogy that teachers must have?
Sure. So, as you rightly said, some of these things have been needed forever. It's not that they are needed only now. And we, in fact, have something called the Center Standards, which is a very comprehensive teacher competency framework. And that framework talks about 4 categories. So technical competencies like understanding the subject, understanding how children learn, understanding how you include and involve everyone in a classroom, being able to plan your lessons properly, being able to derive insights from assessments that you give to students and therefore support them in a certain way. So a range of technical competencies, a range of core competencies like verbal, written communication, logical thinking, etc., which are relevant in any profession, a range of what we call professional competencies, which is you in your professional environment, interaction with
Ramya,
parents. Sorry.
Ramya, okay, let me come back to you. I have a follow-up question, but I'll just come back to you in a second. Huh?
Can I, maybe I can just finish this point just to tie it
just
up.
Have a minute, 1 minute.
Yes, I'll just finish it in a minute. So the framework is holistically looking at a range of competencies, and that is what we call a competent teacher. Now, on teacher development, I would totally agree with you that there are many deficiencies in the system. Having said that, there are also very good quality trainings which don't see real demand. So there is a need for those trainings, but they don't see real demand because the teacher is
All
not
right.
getting
Thank you.
rewarded
Thank you.
accordingly.
Yeah, thank you, Ramya. Yeah, I was driving at something, really, I think what we need is a real shift in mindset of what good teaching means. That
Yeah,
is, how do you facilitate
exactly.
thinking? How do you facilitate imagination? How do you facilitate democratic thinking in terms of more egalitarian thinking, of
Yeah.
more social political awareness? That I think is deeper, goes deeper than competencies. It is, and that's what I was driving at. That,
Yeah, in fact, that's the last part of our framework, the
correct,
mindsets.
correct. So we'll come to that. Akash, I have this, you know that we all know that there's a huge disconnect between education and the employment sector. And in fact, many of us who are employers, we cry about the poor employability of even applicants who have these string of degrees, but we don't find the skills that we need. You've been in this space of skill development for a while. That's what Quest Alliance does. So can you tell us that what kind of skills do you think today's youth need? And if you tie it a little to the 21st century skill that people talk about and how the world is changing so rapidly, you know,
Sure.
skills
Sure.
that people have always needed. But now
Yeah.
the world has changed. What kind of special skills do you think they need? And especially in the context of change maker skills, how they relate to employability of youth.
Sure. And like you rightly said, what is so 21st century about it? You know, we've been talking about the same things in the 19th century, 20th, maybe 20th century onward. So this 21st century is a maybe a term that we framed for our convenience.
Right.
But you know, I think one part of the conversation is also around what are aspirations that young people have, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you see that most aspirations are to do with government jobs, still in a lot of the country. Self-employment or informal sector is another space where most people land up. 85% of India is informal. So in a sense, the aspirations, you know, oftentimes guide the paths that young people end up taking. That, you know, I spend 5, 7, 8 years of my prime of my youth preparing for government jobs because that's what stands for stability, security, and local role models are also, you know, and not just government jobs. It could be bank, it could be army, etc. But obviously that aspirations are changing now with more information and access to, you know, opportunities on the platforms, on digital platforms, etc. But if you know, I were to think about, you know, your question in two parts. One is really, what does a young person need to make meaning of their lives, right? Which is sort of this evolution of self, of who am I, and where do I, what do I stand for in terms of my core ideas, values? What are my family relationships? What are my peer relationships like? How do I navigate and sustain strong family relationships? To what do I want to do? What are my career options? And finally, how do I become an active, engaged member of the community where I can participate in, be a good citizen. So that's the journey a young person is on, and trying to connect these dots between the self, between family, between career, and between community. And I think this process obviously is not a linear one. It's a cyclical one. It's an ever evolving one. But from a skills perspective, like you touched upon, I think there are three aspects to the 21st century skills. One are obviously the foundational skills, which is to know content, core content, numeracy, literacy. There is this idea of digital literacy and digital fluency that's fast emerging to be a foundational skill in today's world. There is the ability to act. So you touched upon creativity, innovation, communication, problem solving, which are meta skills in a sense. And finally, there are humanistic skills, which is to value yourself, to value others, to value things at jobs, ethical, emotional, etc. So this sort of idea of to know, to act, and to value, I would say in three buckets are kind of the core 21st century skills. And sort of underlying all of this, I feel, is this whole idea of learning to learn, and being a self-learner, which is what we touched upon, that learners setting their own goals of what needs to be learned, how it needs to be learned, and how to evaluate what you learned. Was that what you started off in the first place? So the mindset shift that you're talking about is around power. Who holds the power in the learning process? Who has the authority to drive learning in their own space? Who has the relationships? Do I feel safe in my relationships in the learning space to be able to learn what I feel I want to learn? With technology, what we are finding is that young people oftentimes...
You have 30 seconds and then...
Yeah. So with technology, we are often finding that, people who are slower learners, who are below the baseline, learn much more because their fear of learning, which is the sort of the emotional fear, feeling secure in classrooms. Technology seems to sometimes give you this time of just repeating things and keep engaged. Learning and find... Yeah,
I'm going
sure.
to come back to you. There is a question there in the chat box, which I will bring to you very shortly. And just to leave you with this question that you can think of while we speak to Sergey, is that, I like the way you scope the journey from the self to the family to the community and, citizen. So, if you could focus a little on two things. One is what kind of skills do we need? Think of India as a democracy, and as a really aspirational democracy. I don't know that we have yet achieved that. And what kind of skills do we want? Democratic citizenship skills should our education system be helping our students develop? One. And secondly, there was a question that, all the questioning behavior that you're talking about, are the workplaces really ready for that kind of worker, if you will, or do they think of them as rogues? Okay, I'm going to leave you with those thoughts, and you might think of formulating an answer. And maybe Ramya, you think of it also in terms of what kind of teachers do we need to help develop these democratic citizenship skills. Okay, Sergey, let's come to you, young man. Everyone has been talking about students and teachers and everyone, and the student is not been consulted. So we really want to hear from you, my dear. Right? We want to hear that you have distinguished yourself as a change maker, right? And you probably went to, I don't know, was your school special, or are you innately a change maker? But otherwise, what are some of the skills you think a change maker has? Yashvi spoke a little about that. And what supported the development or the acquisition of those skills? Was it your school? Was it your family? Was it your community? Some experiences? If you could tell us a little about that.
Firstly, thank you so much, CSR Box and Ashoka, for providing me this wonderful opportunity as a student to provide my viewpoints on such an important topic. So I would like to say that the problems and challenges I have faced has taught me to be a change maker. My earliest change making experience goes back to 2012 when I was only in class 12 and I was class 2 and I was doing no tobacco awareness campaign. I was in class 6. I had been to Bali Yatra, a very big fair held in the Millennium City of Qatar. And their lack of clean toilets triggered me to develop a smart toilet model, Swatch. Similarly, the death of one of my family members due to cancer forced me to study the reasons behind it, and ultimately, I could develop a bioremediation method for hexavalent chromium, a carcinogen in mining area. Now it has a huge impact on lakhs of people residing in more than 72 villages in and around the chromium mining area of Odisha. Now I have developed a non-invasive estrus detection method for cows, which would be a boom for marginal and sub-marginal dairy farmers. I've also started an online magazine, the Changemaker Times, to highlight the stories of untold heroes. Also, recently I've successfully conducted Udyami Utsav, a platform to connect young innovators and entrepreneurs to incubation support, live interaction with world leaders and all. So what I feel is empathy, teamwork, co-leading, etc. are the basic values of change making. We imbibe these values from our family values, school culture. So like I was inspired by my grandmother. She was my inspiration. She had brought in changes in the lives of thousands of women. So I realized that neither location nor resources matter if we want to bring about the real change. So it was very early that I realized that life is for a bigger cause. So as far as my school, yes, when we think of bringing about change at an early age, we need support from the school, from teachers, from friends as well. So it may be in the form of a moral support, some special benefits, relevant opportunities. Like in my case, it was lab facilities that my school helped me to get. Then we all have to realize one thing, that true education is not restricted to the pages of a book or four walls of a school building. So first we have to bring a mindset shift that education is not only this. And then if we want to make change making a culture and everyone a change maker possible, then suppose we can take the example of two things. One is computer science classes or HPR classes, and other is one more. So the first one in the case is a daily event. In each week we have a class for computer or HPR, while one more is an annual event.
HPR? What is HPR?
Ma'am, that is a games period that we have in our school. So we call it as HPER. So when we start playing games daily, it becomes a culture that physical activities are required for us. But as in case of one Mahotsav, it is an annual event. We plant the trees one day and we forget. So if we want change making...
Okay, Naisargik, I'm going to have to stop you there for a while. We are running a little late, but I'm going to come back to you. So I, just to ask you a follow-up on that point that you, very important point you made, that learning happens in many places. It doesn't only in school, right? Doesn't come only from books, doesn't come only from teachers. It can come from your families, grandmothers, from role models, supportive teachers, from everywhere, right? And I think if anything, COVID has taught us that more distributed idea of education, so that learning can happen in many, many different places. Nes, I think I have the same question for you. That as a student, you clearly said, to think about how does education need to change so that, we have a robust democracy. Akash mentioned power, and that is rarely discussed in school. But will you agree that it should be discussed in school? There are many inequalities, and these are all inequalities of power in terms of gender, in terms of caste, in terms of class, in terms of religion, right? And so do you think that schools should be devoting some time to helping students develop a social and political consciousness and have open discourse on power?
So, ma'am,
I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you so you have a little time to just think about the question. But let me go to Ramya. I know you will be leaving shortly, so let me give you the floor first, and then Akash, you, and then Ashvir, you get a chance too. I'm just very conscious of how little time we have. This is a fascinating discussion. I wish we had more time. Anyway, Ramya, go ahead, please. The question was in terms of developing teachers who can who can help students develop a social and political consciousness so that they can be effective democratic citizens.
So what we at least find in our experience is that ultimately a teacher starts thinking about some of the broader
Ramya, can you switch off your video? We can't hear you. Your voice is breaking. Can you switch off your video?
Aspects of empowering students, including all students, serving. Is this better?
Much better. Much better. Thank you. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Sorry, looks like the internet is not great. Yeah, no, I was just saying that what we have seen in our experience is that, yeah, teachers do need very explicit input with respect to what does it take to build critical thinking, questioning, thinking about society more broadly, etc. in students. And there are sound pedagogies, well-researched pedagogies, which are now associated with some of these things. At the same time, what we also find is that when teachers are confident in their core, whatever subject they are delivering, whatever basics of conceptual understanding they are trying to build, whenever they are confident in that core, then the ability to receive some of this pedagogy becomes much better. And therefore, what the approach we look at as center is one, how do you get teachers to be confident on their core? How do you get the ecosystem more broadly to recognize that? Because ultimately my confidence also comes from some of that external validation. And then how do I get you to take that next step of saying, let me get into pedagogies which will allow me to empower my students, allow me to make my students behave as change makers, etc., etc. And that is a very personalized.
Ramya, I'm so sorry, but I really just want to go back, make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak.
Sure.
Okay, so
yeah,
sorry.
And I'll just say thank you over there, Dr. Sani. And thank you.
Akash, if you'll take the mic, take the floor now, please.
Much for having me on this panel.
Yeah, thank you, Ramya. Thank you. Akash?
Yes. So I think I would say one skill, if I were to really talk about what that needs both from an employer perspective as well as from a learner perspective, is what we call as the learning identity, or the ability to learn, or learnability, which is the ability to learn. And where an learner or an individual considers themselves as a learner who trusts themselves and their direct experiences and believes that they can learn from those situations, and they have that confidence and they can go out of that social conditioning that otherwise stops them from being a learner. They learn to be vulnerable, they learn to be just feeling what they are feeling. So I would say this takes time and a lot of practice in resilience, which really is critical to building that self-learner mindset. And finally, also people around them recognizing that the learner is the innovator. It's not the content, it's not any fancy technologies that we build, but really all recognition of to the learner being the one who is making meaning of anything that's being created.
So you mean that, and I think everybody has spoken about an ecosystem, that what we need basically is to create an enabling environment, an enabling ecosystem which gives students the opportunity to experiment, to think, to ask questions, to critique. And in terms of, democratic citizenship education, what we have developed is a critical, in this case, critical feminist pedagogy. And we have a special curricular space for critical dialogues around gender right now, caste, a deeper understanding, and also a clear understanding that as citizens, it is your responsibility to contribute. It's not a luxury. That is why everyone a change maker and a contributor. I love the title, because truly no democracy can function. It just cannot function unless everyone, and by everyone I mean everyone, the poorest, the most marginalized, all the way up to your IB, etc. They all need to be change makers and contributors. And you're so right that actually when we talk about learner-centered, that's what it means. It means let the learner take charge of their own learning. And our goal as teachers, as educators, is to enable that, right? Yashveer, we left you out of the loop. I hope you're not feeling excluded, but tell us again, in terms of, Ashoka Changemakers culture, right? Especially you've been working a lot with the youth. So tell us a little more. And if you focus on the whole change making, not just technological innovation, but more social, political innovations in terms of thinking. Right. Really think of progressive schools as schools that are thinking more progressively, not just technologically advanced schools.
Sure. So I'll keep it very brief so that we have some time for Q&A, Urushi.
Yeah, just a minute, and then Nesargis, you'll get 1 minute too. Yeah.
So, so what we have learned by working with so many of these young change makers is, so there's a very basic framework for being a change maker. And the framework is as simple as that young people need to be encouraged to have their own ideas, which is different from, say, volunteering on a cause. Then they need to be able to build a team around that idea and then also realize some sort of impact, right? And when you go through this framework, you are building skills like empathy, teamwork, collaborative leadership, and problem solving. And as a whole, it gives you then that agency that I can change any given situation or any given gap which is available in a situation. So that has been our learning, that as a society, we need to encourage young people to come out with ideas and just experience that agency. Because only if you practice, you will be able to learn and build those skills. And this is not a theory class kind of skills, but this is more about how do we encourage our young people to practice them and build them. So that's where I'll rest my comments.
Thank you. Yes, Yashvi. Nesargis, I want to come to you and see what your thoughts as a representative of the student body on this panel are about what do you think you need? How do you think the schools and education systems change so that everyone can learn how to be a change maker, and not just technologically, but socially and politically, and a contributing, effective, democratic citizen? Right, let's say.
So, ma'am, to make change making a culture and everyone a change maker possible, what I think is a dedicated period can be allotted for catering change makers and thought leaders of tomorrow, when a dedicated time will be allotted within the school time, which is otherwise may not be possible due to the busy schedule of students in today's time. The bandwidth of this program can be wide and flexible, so that any kind of change maker, as you say, innovation, technology, political, social, can explore his or her potential. And it may include honoring one's skills as a good orator, or providing necessary facilities for bringing change through innovation, etc.
Thank you, Nesargis, and I absolutely endorse your idea of making it part of the official curriculum, so that there is a dedicated space to thinking, to raising social and political awareness, to making students think more creatively. Actually, all pedagogy should be geared towards that, and for which teachers need to learn how to think like change makers too. This is not going to happen in a vacuum. If you want to have students, and if you want teachers to create enabling environments So they must also learn to think like change makers. But teacher training needs a huge shift as well. I'm going to ask a question that Rama has put on. And she says that earlier we had mentors that we could spend time and who will be around to guide us in the long term. Okay. For me, some biographies have been fantastic with pop explosion, nuclear families, and the need to do it now. How can technology and great leaders come together in developing people at scale? And so let me just reframe that question a little. That, you know, technology is on everybody's mind, and now never than before, you know. It has suddenly exploded that, oh, we need technology, because everybody has been at the mercy of technology. And so those who had it were able to use it. And of course, once again, those who did not have it have been struggling. Okay. So I think the question she's asking is, earlier we had the oral culture, we had people, it was face-to-face, there were mentors, there were guides, there were bio. And now with technology having taken center stage, Akash, if you'd like to take that how do you think technology can help in helping build this holistic person that we are talking about, this holistic student, this holistic idea of education, not just the technical idea of education, and not even a labor market oriented idea of education, but a citizenship idea, a value-based idea, a social and political, and a labor-based idea. Yes, Sanjana, I can see you. We have 5 more minutes. Got it? Yes.
I think that's another panel, but I think so one thing we've learned at least is, you know, there is more opportunity that technology is providing to pursue interest-based pathways. So if I was interested in being a chef, musician, or someone in environment, I feel that drive to learn something that I'm really interested in, and technology then being the catalyst in connecting to like-minded people, to ideate together, to reflect in a safe space using technology as a medium. So I feel that's the role I feel right now technology is playing. Is playing. If I say, okay, there is a learning pathway where it is about curriculum and completion and part of that, there is also a technology-based pathway which people like Byju's, etc., have exploited.
Akash, I'm going to have to stop you because we only have 2 minutes left. I'm keeping a stern eye on what, and Sanjana is looking at me very, very seriously as though she means business. Is that I want to first of all thank all our panelists and our attendees, and I just want to wrap up the discussion with a few points that have emerged from everybody's experiences, and if I might add mine own as well, that in terms of technology, you know, how we have used it in the last 4 months. In fact, I found that because everybody has been locked in, we have been able to use the technology platform to connect people from villages, from urban slums, from middle-class homes, colleges, on webinars. It has become easier because earlier we only thought about getting everyone in one place, truck lao, bus lao, sab kuch karo. Now it is much easier to do that. And of course, it meant providing connectivity, which also we have done. And what we found is that we've had many very, very interesting critical dialogues on the toxic sexual culture, on caste, on gender, you know, and citizenship. And everybody has contributed very, very intensely, because right now people are thinking very intensively. So I think whereas technology does, of course it is, you know, and all this weirdly enough is happening. Look at all of us, we're sitting in our homes and here we are chatting to I don't know how many thousands. Our outreach has gone up. Our influence have increased, right? And logistically it has become much easier to get more people, more diverse people onto a panel. Of course, the clincher is that the digital divide, like many other divides right now, it has acquired primacy. That just as it's important to build highways, we must build optical highways. And in fact, technology has shown us, this crisis has shown us that technology can be leveraged very, very strongly to leapfrog some of the problems that we have. Of course, I think we've all been talking about how we need a complete shift. Our curriculum is totally out of date. Our pedagogy is out of date. Our understanding of education is very out of date. It's still very technical. Whereas when we talk about change makers, when we talk about contribution, we are truly thinking about it in a broader sense. And it should always have been, and all our teachers, Dewey, Tagore, Krishnamurti, so many people have told Socrates, for crying out loud, they told us that, hey, education is much broader than just educating you to join the labor force, just teaching you math, science, history, geography, and the technical deconstruction. It's about learning how to live. It's about learning how to live as a person, as a family member, as a community member, and as a citizen. And so looking at all of that holistically, then, I think even the Ashoka Changemaker, sometimes it ends up becoming more technical, just some kind of technological change, which is a good thing. It is a good change. But I think, again, we need to put it squarely in the context. And Akash, you did that so well, of a person's life. And life is not lived alone. It is lived in a family, it's lived in a community, it's lived in the workplace, it's lived in a country, and then in a universe. So how do you have a more expansive idea of education, of teacher training, of pedagogies, of skills development? What kinds of skills? And finally, how do we also define the whole idea of change maker and contribution in this holistic context?